Hello, I'm Matt Pierce. I'm a web developer from Montclair State University, and this is an example of how to set up ubuntuMATE as a guest operating system on VirtualBox to serve as a development workspace and a web server. This is a tutorial for complete novices, and it'll take you from absolutely nothing installed on the hard drive to a fully functioning web server in about 20 minutes or so. Right off the bat, you need to make sure that you download the latest version of VirtualBox. As of this video, that's 5.0. You also need to make sure you download a copy of ubuntuMATE for 32-bit i386 architecture. I go with 32-bit because 64-bit requires about 50% more hard drive space. I'm cheating a little here because I've already downloaded both. I'm recording this through VirtualBox. Most of the default installation options work just fine. Time zone and keyboard layout are usually automatically detected just fine. You don't have to worry about matching these to your workplace credentials. And for the purposes of this demonstration, all of the passwords I'm using are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to do a bit of a time skip ahead here because a video of copying files isn't going to be very entertaining. Once you're done copying files, you need to restart. One weird thing about this process is that ubuntuMATE will actually crash while trying to restart. That's just fine. What you actually want to do is shut down the virtual machine here and eject the CD from it. Once you've ejected the CD, you can restart the machine and it'll boot off the hard drive for the first time. The first boot takes a while. You just kind of have to be patient. It'll probably be faster on your machine if you're not recording video. That takes a lot of VirtualBox's resources. On first run especially, it takes a while to pull up the desktop manager. You notice the missing application icons. They finally loaded in. It's really much faster when you're not recording video. The welcome panel takes a surprising amount of system resources, so disable that for future boots. Go to the software tab, the second to last tab for more software, and at the very bottom, install Synaptic Package Manager. Synaptic is more or less the standard package installer for Debian. It lets you install other software. There are nicer, friendlier package managers out there, but this is a good one for this tutorial because we know exactly what we need to install and we'll just look it up by name. If you're interested at all in learning how to use Linux, it's a good idea to learn the standard tools like Synaptic. Once it's installed, you should be able to launch it straight from here. But you'll put in your you'll have to put in your administrator password to run it though. The administrative password, of course, is the password that you specified during the installation process. The first thing we're going to search for are the VirtualBox guest tools. These are drivers for the virtualized hardware that will be installed to this Linux installation. It's helpful to let you move your mouse in and out of the window and to share the clipboard between the host operating system and the guest operating system. It also gives you a better display driver. I'm not going to change my resolution around a lot for this video. I'm going to keep it at 1024 by 768, but once you've installed the display manager, you can go as high as your physical monitor will allow. There's a little bit of dead air in this video. Unfortunately, things took a little bit longer to install than I expected. You see the mouse creeping around, it's because at this point I thought it had crashed. But it's still going. If your installation takes a little bit longer than you expect, just give it time. There we go. Okay, let's get out of Synaptic. I'm just going to check real quick to make sure that this welcome screen doesn't come up when I log in, and then shut down the computer. You really want to restart, but I shut down so that I can record multiple video segments. Now we're going to get down to the important work of installing a web server. I'm again showing you this all the way from boot through shutdown with no interruptions. I wanted to emphasize that this process isn't nearly as long and as difficult as you would originally imagine. You'll have to set aside some appreciable amount of time, mostly for downloading. Mostly what it did during my installation was download the ISO for the installation disk from ubuntuMATE's website and download updated packages during the installer. See, what's on the CD or DVD isn't always the most recent version. So when you install Ubuntu to the hard drive, it has the option to download the latest version of each package and install that instead. You'll notice the screen's a little bit smaller. After you first install the drivers for the virtual display, it'll default down to 800 by 600. Once the UI comes up, head over to Preferences, Hardware, and Displays. Then you can set the resolution to whatever you want. One thing you'll notice, which is very frustrating, is that once you've installed these drivers for the mouse integration, you lose your cursor in video recording. Under Mate Tweak, under Windows, now give me a second here because I forgot what I was looking for when I recorded this video. Down at the bottom of the Windows tab, you can change the window manager from Marco's software compositor to no compositor. This will get rid of the shadows underneath windows and it'll take away previews when switching between windows, but it should consume less resources, which is probably what you want in a virtual machine. Let's open up Synaptic Package Manager again, and we're going to search for the software we need to install. The first one, of course, is Apache Web Server. I'm going to search for name only because we know exactly what name we want. When you select Apache to install, Synaptic will also download all of the additional files you need to make it work. Next, we're going to install PHP for Apache. Which I wrote down the name wrong, so I get this wrong twice before getting it right. It's easier to live with the embarrassment of a typo than to re-record this entire thing. I installed PHP 7.0, the latest version of PHP. It's much faster than regular PHP, or the most commonly used versions of PHP, which are 5.6 and 6.4, I think. But PHP 7 finally pulled the trigger on depreciating a lot of functions, so some of your legacy code may not run in 7. And of course, when you install PHP, the easiest way for us to do it is to install the Apache module for PHP, which will then download PHP automatically. You want to download the MySQL module for PHP that matches whichever version of PHP you installed. This should be pretty quick, because this is just a client. Next, we're going to install MySQL itself. Unfortunately, there's not really a great way to filter this down more, so the results are in alphabetical order. Just scroll down to M, mark MySQL Server for installation, and then also mark MySQL Workbench for installation. That's a graphical interface for working with the database software. This will take a good amount of time. You can see just downloading is taking a while. There's a ton of files here. When you're setting up MySQL Server, it'll prompt you to set a password for the root user. Of course, for this tutorial, the password is just 12345. If you're not doing anything secure on this virtual machine, or if your virtual machine is going to be stored in a secured location, like on a protected BitLocker hard drive, you don't have to worry about setting secure passwords, really. At this point, I knew that this would take a while to install, so I opened up the details just so that you could see that it's still going for real. Okay, that's all the software we need to have a basic functioning web server. We do need to change some permissions though. Open up a terminal, switch over to superuser. My password, of course, 12345. First thing we're going to do is enable SSL for Apache and configure the default SSL virtual host. Apache can run multiple sites through a system called virtual hosts. It's kind of difficult to explain, but that will probably have to be a topic for a different day. Restart Apache to enable the SSL site, and then the other thing I need to do here is change the ownership of the root directory for the website so that I can write files to it. By default, the website's root directory is owned by the root username. So the first thing we're going to do is go to localhost and see that the Ubuntu default page is displaying. That means Apache 2 is running. Try it in HTTPS. The certificate we're using is not signed, so you'll have to add an exception. But once you add the exception, we have a functioning site in HTTPS. The next thing we want to do is to ensure that PHP and MySQL are working. So we're going to navigate to the site root, right-click here, create a document, and call it test.php. Just press enter and that will open up in Pluma, the default text editor. And we're going to make a very simple PHP script. First, we're going to test that we can make a MySQL connection to the database server we installed. These values, of course, are host name, username, and password. Then we're just going to dump that variable so we can make sure that it's not null. Navigate to test.php and we see that we have a valid MySQL I object and we have the test page being displayed beneath it. That means that both PHP and PHP's MySQL module are working correctly. In this case, I just wanted to get a little bit of capture for MySQL Workbench, so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to create a new schema here, eventually. Yep. We're just going to keep the name new schema. This is a little hard to use in 1024 by 768. Some of the buttons are off the right hand side of the screen. Like this one, we're going to create a new table. Of course, our IDs for a simple table, we want to have not null, primary key, unique, auto incrementing integer. And then we'll just add a name in there for fun. And then the apply button in the lower right hand corner, it'll give you a confirmation dialog. You click apply and then close. Alright, now we have a table that we can connect to. Let's make sure that we can open that table in MySQL on PHP. That always confused me in PHP. The MySQL command to use a database is use, but the PHP command to use a database is select. We're going to pull a description of the table we just created. We're going to check to make sure that the response came back as a non-false or non-null value. We're going to fetch the object describing the first column of our table that we created and dump that out. If the response came back as null, we want to echo an error message. Alright, so we save that file, switch back over to Firefox. I'm actually going to view the source here so that you can see the var_dump formatting. So that object right there is a object representing the first field in the table we created, which is our primary key. One application I recommend installing is Visual Studio Code. It's an open source code editor from Microsoft. Just make sure you download the 32-bit Debian package. If you're new to Linux, you should understand that Ubuntu is built on Debian. So when you want to install a package and you're given a choice of either a .deb file or a .rpm file, Deb is for Debian. RPM is for Red Hat Package Manager. So if you're on Red Hat Linux, you need an RPM. If you're on Debian or Ubuntu, you need a Deb. Windows and Mac users who think that Linux can be daunting, it's not that crazy. You have to change the way you think a little bit, change some of your terminology, but this is an example of just going to a website, downloading some software, and having it install automatically. It really wasn't all that complicated. Visual Studio Code will be placed under Programming in the Applications menu. First time you start it, it tries to open up this documentation page, which is worth reading, but not worth recording on video. What makes this a good editor is that you can open a folder, like our website root HTML folder. It'll show you all the files in the folder and recurse down. It gives you descriptions of the base functions of any language that it recognizes, does code highlighting and auto-completion. At this point we've got a working server, so I'm just going to shut down, and that's the end of this tutorial. If you found this video helpful and would like to have step-by-step instructions that you can follow along at your own pace, go to my website, mattpierce.info, and you can check out an article called Focus on Development that also has links to the latest version of VirtualBox and ubuntuMATE. Thank you very much.